Most people think power exchange reveals sexuality. I don't think that's what it reveals at all. I think it reveals human nature. Not immediately, not superficially, not in the performative way people often imagine when they hear those words. What it reveals is what happens when the structures people use to manage themselves begin dropping away. And once you witness enough human beings in those moments, you start understanding people very differently. You start realizing how much of everyday life is performance, how many interactions are managed, how many identities are curated, how many identities are constructed, how many people are surviving through image rather than direct relationship with themselves. Most people are not walking around as their actual selves. They are walking around as adaptations, versions of themselves organized around approval, safety, desirability, success, protection, status, or sheer survival. And you can feel it once you begin seeing clearly the polished personality, the carefully controlled emotional tone, the rehearsed confidence, the hyper independence, the chronic composure, the persona designed to ensure vulnerability never fully enters the room. People become deeply identified with these structures over time, so deeply that they often confuse the performance with who they actually are. But underneath those false structures, there's usually something else waiting: fear, grief, longing, shame, need, emotional hunger, exhaustion, loneliness, tenderness people don't know how to safely express. And one of the most profound things I learned is that almost everyone wants to be seen, but very few people feel safe enough to actually be visible. That contradiction shapes enormous amounts of human behavior. People crave intimacy while simultaneously organizing their entire personality around preventing real exposure. They want love while hiding the parts of themselves they believe could threaten attachment. They want connection while remaining psychologically armored. They want to be understood while carefully controlling what can actually be perceived. That creates enormous internal fragmentation because eventually you realize people are not relating to you, they are relating to the managed version of you. And the longer that continues, the more disconnected people often become from themselves internally. That's why performance becomes exhausting. Not because maintaining an image requires effort, although it does, because somewhere underneath it, the nervous system knows it is not fully known or safe. And human beings are not built to thrive indefinitely inside emotional invisibility. They're just not. One of the things Power Exchanged revealed very quickly was projection. Projection everywhere. People project constantly, not just in romantic dynamics, everywhere. They project fantasies onto people, authority onto people, healing onto people, safety onto people, power onto people, parental dynamics onto people, meaning onto people. Very rarely are people responding only to what is actually in front of them. Most people are interacting partially with their own unconscious material, and that can get messy. And the more emotionally deprived or psychologically fragmented someone is, the stronger those projections often become. Because unmet needs intensify fantasy. That was one of the biggest things I observed. People weren't always seeking what they claimed to be seeking. Very often, they were seeking emotional experiences they didn't consciously know how to articulate. Containment, permission, relief, witnessing, safety, freedom from performance, freedom from responsibility, freedom from identity, freedom from constant self-management. And underneath many of those desires was exhaustion. The exhaustion of maintaining a self that no longer felt fully alive. A lot of people think surrender is weakness. I don't see it that way at all. I think unconscious surrender is dangerous, but conscious surrender requires enormous awareness because genuine surrender requires trust. And trust is one of the rarest things I encountered. Not because people are incapable of trust, because most people have been betrayed somewhere, sometimes by parents, sometimes by partners, sometimes by authority figures, sometimes by life itself. So people develop protective identities, hyperindependence, control, emotional detachment, self-sufficiency, performance, intellectualization, all designed to prevent vulnerability from becoming dangerous again. But eventually, those protections begin creating another kind of suffering: isolation, dissociation. And that changes people. You can feel it. People become disconnected not only from others, but from themselves. They lose access to spontaneity, playfulness, softness, direct emotional truth, embodied presence. Everything becomes managed, and the body carries that management constantly. It's one of the reasons I became so interested in nervous systems over time, because the body will always tell the truth long before the personality does. You can hear someone say they are fine while their entire nervous system communicates constriction. You can watch someone maintain perfect composure while exhaustion pours through their body. You can feel the hypervigilance underneath charm, the fear underneath arrogance, the shame underneath superiority, the grief underneath control. Human beings leak truth constantly. Most people just aren't trained to perceive it. And what fascinated me most was what happened when performance started dropping. Not completely, not dramatically, just enough. Enough for someone to stop managing every expression, enough for the body to soften slightly, enough for emotion to emerge without immediate suppression. That's when people became real, and often profoundly vulnerable, because underneath many identities was simply a person trying desperately to survive pain they had never fully processed. Yeah. A person who learned certain emotions were unacceptable, certain needs were dangerous, certain parts of themselves threatened love, safety, belonging, or survival. So those parts became hidden, not healed, hidden. And hidden things do not disappear. They organize behavior from underneath. That's why secrecy became another thing I thought about deeply. Everyone has secret selves. Not always dark secrets, not dramatic secrets, just unexpressed realities. The self that feels too emotional, too needy, too angry, too sensitive, too weak, too sexual, too ambitious, too afraid, too human. People spend enormous energy trying to maintain coherence between who they are internally and who they believe they're allowed to be externally. That gap creates suffering because eventually the performance starts becoming claustrophobic. And what I realized over time is that many people are not actually starving for pleasure, they are starving for permission, permission to stop performing for a moment, permission to stop carrying the identity, permission to stop managing perception, permission to stop being the role, permission to be emotionally real without immediate punishment, judgment, or abandonment. That changes people profoundly. To be seen clearly without being destroyed for what is revealed. I think that's one of the deepest human longings there is. Not admiration, not validation, recognition, real recognition. To feel another person encounter you directly instead of only encountering versions of you or the performance. And unfortunately, many people have very little experience with that because modern life rewards performance constantly. Functionality, image, productivity, status, curated identity, emotional branding. Meanwhile, the actual human underneath often becomes increasingly disconnected from themselves. That disconnection creates enormous loneliness, even inside relationships, even inside success, even inside families, even inside visibility. I met people who were deeply admired and profoundly unknown at the same time. People desired by everyone around them while internally feeling emotionally invisible. That kind of loneliness changes people because eventually you begin wondering whether anyone actually loves you or whether they love the character you learn to perform. And once that question enters someone psychologically, it becomes very difficult to ignore. I think this is also why authenticity terrifies so many people, because authenticity risks destabilizing attachment. If your life, relationships, success, desirability, or identity were built around performance, then becoming truly visible can feel extremely dangerous. You risk disapproval, rejection, misunderstanding, loss, exposure. So many people remain fragmented because fragmentation feels safer than loss or risk. But fragmentation has severe consequences too. The body carries fragmentation. You see it in chronic tension, numbness, anxiety, compulsive behavior, addictions, emotional detachment, depression, identity confusion, relationship instability. The psyche is constantly trying to reconcile what has been divided internally. And the more someone suppresses themselves, the more pressure builds underneath the personality structure. Eventually, something begins pushing toward integration, sometimes gently, sometimes destructively. A relationship collapses, an addiction escalates, a breakdown happens, an affair happens, a spiritual awakening happens, a health crisis happens, a profound grief experience happens. Suddenly, the performance can no longer fully hold. And underneath it is often someone who has not been directly encountered in many years, maybe decades. That's why I no longer judge human behavior as simplistically as I once did. Because once you witness enough people closely, you realize most behavior is compensation for something unresolved. Control compensating for fear. Arrogance compensating for shame. Perfectionism compensating for inadequacy. Detachment compensating for vulnerability. Hyper independence compensating for betrayal. People adapt brilliantly, but adaptation is not freedom. Not at all. Sometimes adaptation is just survival that became identity. And one of the deepest truths I learned is that human beings do not want to live entirely inside performance forever. Something in us longs to be real, to be connected, to be authentic, not polished, not optimized, not managed, real. To exhale, to stop monitoring, to stop curating every interaction, to stop protecting every wound, to stop holding ourselves together so tightly. I think that's why genuine presence feels so powerful when people finally encounter it. Because real presence allows another person to soften, and they can feel that safety, not through force, not through performance, not through manipulation, through nervous system recognition. The body recognizes when it no longer has to perform survival constantly. And that changes people more than advice, more than analysis, more than image. I think that's ultimately what I learned about human nature. Beneath the identities, defenses, projections, masks, roles, and performances Most people are simply trying to find a place where they no longer have to disappear in order to be loved. I'm Kat Grace. Thank you for being here. Until next time, namaste.
I come back in